Hello and welcome to Very Much Mistaken with Chris Parrott and
James Parrott.
it is round 4 at this. No, it's not. It's round 3. Classic.
Yeah.
No, it is round 4. It is because we did the one before. Anyway.
Yeah.
So
maybe the fourth episode.
Fourth episode. We're 3 races in, and I'm dubbing this back down to earth episode because there was a lot of familiarity about how Sunday's race played out, wasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, not every race can be interesting, and unfortunately, this one wasn't necessarily as interesting as the last two. Still some talking points, but Lewis looking just again showing his class. Starting from second on the grid, going down to third at one point, and then just race pace was just too strong for everyone involved. That meant he got past Verstappen relatively quickly, and then Bottas, and then never really looked like giving it up. So, what do you think?
I suppose at the front, the real interest was really played out in the opening laps, where essentially they were in reverse pace order with. I suppose so. First of all, things got away pretty smoothly at the very start. There was quite a nice battle between. There was quite a nice battle between Norris and Ocon for fourth. I think it was fourth or fifth at the time, anyway. And then randomly, Kimi Raikkonen just ran into the back of his teammate on a straight. I mean, I assume he wasn't looking where he was going, and that sounds like a glib thing to say. But if he was busy making some adjustments on the wheel, then you can sort of understand why that would happen. But that is the only explanation for a man as experienced as Kimi is for just running into the back of his teammate. Yeah,
he obviously just didn't realise how good a run he got off, like the last corner going onto the straight, and I don't know, picked up a slipstream and then wasn't concentrating, didn't realise how much quicker he was going than his teammate, just bumped into the back of him. It was a bit unfortunate that his wing went under the car and eventually took him out of the race there, because I mean, there's plenty of times where you knock a wing off and you can just go into the pits and sort it out. So
yeah, it wasn't a race-ending incident for Kimi, but for that fact, as you say, it brought out the safety car on lap 1, second time in the season that's happened, and it seemed to be out for quite a long time. And we had perhaps our first talking point, which is around how the lead car has evolved the philosophy around building up to restart, because time was basically you would hit the last sector and the lead car, whoever was in first, would slow right down, back the pack up, and then look to wait for the safety car to pull into the pits and give themselves as much of the track as possible to then race at full speed to negate any slipstream advantage that they might be had. What has become more fashionable recently is to actually delay restarting the race, in effect, to as late as possible, and this has had some quite dangerous consequences. If you think to what happened in Mugello last year, that was born out of this fact that this seems to be the Durago move for restarting races now, and I wonder if it's something that the FIA and Formula One just need to look at in terms of how they could perhaps make it a little safer, because obviously you've got drivers waiting to go, and they're trying to sort of preempt when go is going to happen, and that can lead to some. It seems to me that is more dangerous than how restarts were approached a few years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so talking about the Mugello one, I think it was just. I can't remember. I think it was Giovinazzi who was the main one who tried to essentially jump the start. And I just don't get how anyone else can be blamed for that apart from him. It was just like a silly thing trying to preempt it. And it just kind of like set everyone else off. And he got relatively heavy, or there's a few drivers that got relatively heavy like reprimands for it because of that. But I mean, so what would you say would be a better way of doing it, apart from just letting the lead man take his go and then everyone else just has to follow on afterwards?
Well, I'm wondering if, and I think this is how it's done in the States, in NASCAR and IndyCar, that are obviously have a lot more familiar with restarts. Pace car comes out, is almost guaranteed, basically guaranteed to come out every single race there. But the restart is dictated by the marshals. They wave the green flag and the race is go from when they say. I wonder if that is ultimately a safer solution, But does that take an advantage away from the car that's in first place to dictate when to go again? Bottas's tactics blew an ill wind for Hamilton, who was jumped by Bottas and then also Verstappen, and that was the key thing that was able to get Verstappen ahead of Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean it's a funny one, that, because you think about how teams are supposed to, how beneficial it is when teams are running together, and whilst like in this race it turned out that the main person you had to worry about was Lewis if you were ahead of him. Would in another situation you actually not want to put your teammate out like that and actually keep your team 1-2, because then you have more control over kind of like who's coming up behind you, because with having Verstappen in there kind of mixing it up actually in some situations might make Bottas's life harder. So yeah, it's an interesting one, because they're all racing. Yeah, Formula One's just funny in that way, in that it's a team sport but also an individual sport, and you have these massive, you have these team tactics, but then also there's also just individuals making decisions for their own benefit, and yeah, it's just a funny dynamic that comes into Formula One when your teammates and also racing against each other.
Ultimately, the restart, Verstappen being able to pass Lewis in an opportunistic fashion, was to the benefit of everyone, because I think ultimately it put all the drivers in their reverse order of raw speed. Hamilton behind Verstappen and Bottas, and in those opening stages, I think it looked like Verstappen was perhaps going to challenge Bottas more, but then he seemed to make a mistake going into the long final turn at turn 14, which gave Hamilton an opportunity to overtake him using the Mercedes speed advantage. And that speed advantage was going to prove critical for how the rest of the race played out at the front, because it seemed the circuit layout was such that if you had a top speed advantage, you were going to be able to pass people if you were quicker overall, but not so if you didn't. And that was an issue for Verstappen throughout the race in terms of trying to get past Bottas and then putting pressure on Hamilton later on.
Yeah, and I think another element or another factor that comes into it is the conditions, the track conditions, and the wind conditions as well, making it seem apparent like all the drivers at the end of it seem to say that it was hard work racing on that day, because I don't know, Verstappen was complaining a bit about how the grip wasn't as good as last year, because they resurfaced the track. But Hamilton also said that just because of the slightly different surface and the wind just meant that you're fighting the car so much more. The kind of like grip and downforce was a bit more variable, because it was like just gusty. Weren't quite sure where the grip was on the tarmac.
It's also spring in Portugal instead of summer when they had the last race, and the air temperature is gonna impact things, the track temperature as well. Yeah. So there's all sorts of different variables, which mean yes, they're at the same circuit, but the conditions are very, very different. No, you got the sense, certainly as the race unfolded, that Mercedes had the quickest overall package, particularly when they switched to the hard tyre. So the likelihood was it was going to be a Mercedes. Hamilton was always, I think, going to get past Verstappen. The fact that it happened when it did, I think, maybe ultimately cost Bottas, because Bottas looked very strong at the end of the race, and if Hamilton hadn't have gotten past Verstappen when he did, he might not have then had an opportunity to get past Valtteri. So Hamilton came up to Bottas, DRS turn 1 was, and it seemed, Martin Brundle said this in commentary, Bottas made it very hard for himself to defend because of the angle of how aggressively he defended the inside line and really closed off the angle into turn 1. It's quite an unusual corner where you look at it on the track map and it's quite sharp, but because of how wide the track is and the angle that the road sort of goes off, it looks like a 90-degree right, but it's a very quick
corner, yeah.
But that does mean if you go right to the inside of the track, you are really making that angle very narrow, and you're going to have to lift off heavily. And it's funny how your perspective is how a race is so much more than just sort of like how much overtaking there is. Because if you were to say you could describe that race as Hamilton battles from third to win with 2 passes on track against his championship rivals to win Portuguese Grand Prix, and that sounds, putting my spin doctor hand on, like quite an interesting race. But yet, even though that is what happened, it felt like there was sort of an inevitability that, or I don't know, it was just a lack of drama around that, how that unfolded.
Yeah, this is one of the times when you kind of moan about DRS again, isn't it? It just every single time someone got relatively near their guy in front, DRS just did so much of the job for them.
But it felt like turn 1 was the sort of turn where you could carry a lot of speed into it. So if you were going faster, you could carry that speed through the corner, which made an overtake really easy. And the fact that it was a long final turn onto the straight doesn't make following easy as you approach the DRS zone. But it was just one of those ones where it seemed it was either not possible to pass or too easy. It wasn't that sweet spot in between where it can allow for some close racing. Verstappen in that early part of the race was able to run with the Mercedes, and there was this sort of classic, and I do like these battles where the car behind comes in and goes for the undercut. But what was interesting was because they went onto the hard tyres, the peak performance wasn't there to extract right away. It took a bit of time to switch them on, which meant that, yes, when Bottas came in right away, Verstappen wasn't ahead, but Bottas was on hard tyres that took a bit of time to get going and fired up, which that meant that Verstappen was in a position to make the pass on track, which ultimately was more exciting.
So as part of the new regs that are being brought in, they are going to phase out tyre blankets, and I think they're getting rid of them in 2020. I think they're going to be completely gone by 2023 or 24 or something. I assumed it was just a way of cost cutting. Like it's kind of like a low hanging fruit. We don't need tyre blankets as such. If we don't need them, then let's take that out of the kind of like the budget of it, and then just make them kind of like manage their tyres on their own. But if it was actually brought in because adds another variable of driver skill, then that would make a lot of sense, just as what you were saying.
Which it certainly does, and it was visibly hard for cars coming in on fresh tyres. You saw it with Hamilton when he switched onto the hards, because they were just coming up to, he came out just in front of some lap traffic that the other two, because they'd pitted earlier, came out just behind, and it was a Williams I think he was in front of, and for half a lap he couldn't pull away from a Williams, which under normal circumstances you would have seen him pull away from, because he was on cold tyres. And then when Bottas came in and just ahead of Verstappen, the turn 3 or 4, the hard right, sort of like at the top of the first section, him running wide, which was the mistake he's made. It was that's something that you can really connect to as a fan, that something is difficult when you see a driver running wide, squirming around, and that mistake is what cost him the position. It's interesting. So it's interesting because there was a point then when you have Hamilton in front and pulling away, and then you have Verstappen in second, that we looked like we were seeing a typical Bottas race where he was just going to drift away, presumably demoralised by the fact that he's gone from first to third, been overtaken by his teammate and a Red Bull. But you heard some fiery motivational talk from the garage, and suddenly he seemed to find a new lease of performance and was able to get back on Verstappen and put him under pressure, and that was borne right through to the end of the race, where we had this funny change to soft tyre to gain the fastest lap point, which I actually liked. You know, that in a race that was kind of petering out, that was an interesting dynamic to see play out, and he got it. So I wonder if the team are kind of learning that they need to help Valtteri stay focused and motivated and confident. it's unusual to hear Toto chirping in, revving Valtteri up, but he's had to do it the last two races now. We didn't get a chance to see if it was going to work in Imola, but it certainly seemed to in Portugal. But nevertheless, he still finished third behind the two main championship rivals and is distancing himself, therefore, from the championship fight, which won't please him. Hamilton had to make another pass for the lead because Perez did his thing, staying out on the softs as long as he did. It ultimately was of no benefit on the mediums, staying out on the mediums longer than anyone else. And ultimately that had zero impact really on his race or on anyone else's, because the gaps were such that he was the first to go onto a soft tyre to get the fastest lap, but the cars in front had enough of a gap so that they were able to. If we're to evaluate Perez after 3 rounds, where do we think he is? Would he be happy with his performance after 3 races?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes. I think it was Carlos Sainz said in between Imola and Portugal that going team is like changing formula. It's like going from like the difference in how the car feels. It's the same as like going from like Formula 3 to Formula 2. It is just that much of a difference that actually it seems that getting used to a car does take a serious long time. Daniel Ricciardo's obviously been talking about it a lot as well, and he was asked a question by Simon Lazenby. He says Carlos Sainz said it's like changing formula. Do you agree with him? He was like, yeah, 100%. It's so crazy going into a new car. So, and you look at how Danny Ricciardo's been clearly getting better, but race pace still not there, or had a really bad qualifying for Portugal. And then you look at how Sergio Perez is dealing with his new car, who's on the front row in qualifying in Imola. He is, fourth out of the top 2, which is where you probably expect him to be. Fourth or third. He hasn't been like faultless, but actually I think he's shown that he's definitely worthy of that seat, and he is clearly like improving. And I think he'll realize that he's just got to keep going, keep getting time in the seat. Keep understanding, because I think Danny Ricciardo's interview is really interesting when he talks about how when you're first starting out, you're making setup changes, and they're not setup changes for performance, they're setup changes for comfort, and so you can just drive the car. Then once you get used to how the car's how to drive the car, you can start then making setup changes to improve the actual overall performance and increase lap time. So they've got so much to think about going into a new car that I don't think we should kind of look at any of them and think they're doing a bad job. And I actually think Sergio Perez, out of all of the people who've switched, is probably getting the most out of the car early on.
Interesting. I think I'd overall agree. He probably would have hoped perhaps to have had at least one podium finish out of the first 3 races, so he might be disappointed from that point of view. But his races have been complicated by things out of his control in Bahrain, by himself fundamentally in Imola, albeit you could argue conditions played their role there, and then a bad start really put him out of contention in the 3rd round. But ultimately, I agree. I think he'll be happy, and he's done very well. The rest of the race, yes, it played out in a kind of familiar way with Lewis getting to the front and just demonstrating that on that day he had the best and strongest package, crossing the line in first, Verstappen second, and initially getting the bonus point for fastest lap, but unfortunately that lap was cancelled out because I think he went right on turn 14 on the last corner, which I did notice actually live during the race, and so I thought his lap was going to get cancelled. Bottas coming home in 3rd and Perez in 4th. So this is the first time it's taken 3 races for the sort of like the top 2 teams to finish in the top 4 places, which is a good sign. And sort of another detail which reflects on an interesting season is that the pole sitter has yet to win so far from the first 3 rounds. Taking this result and then the first 3 rounds, I think there are kind of 2 interpretations about what's going on at the front. The first is that Mercedes were far off in pre-season testing from Red Bull, got a bit closer by race 1, a bit closer by race 2, and are now ahead, and therefore are likely to continue. If this season is, and therefore this season is a developmental war, and it's going to be which team can develop the best, understanding, of course, that you can't do it too much because of all the big changes that are coming next year. The second interpretation is that the first 2 rounds suited Red Bull more than Mercedes. Mercedes were able to get a win in the first, in spite of that, because the performance was very close, and round 3 suited Mercedes more. The track suited Mercedes more, particularly on the hard tyre, which was going to be run on for the majority of the race, and we just have to take it race by race to know which car has got the performance edge. Have you got an inkling as to which of those 2 explanations is the right one?
I mean, I think I go with like the horses for courses one, like the track. Judging by what everyone said after the race, I think Paul Di Resta, was that the Scottish guy?
Yes, it's the guy who chimes in on commentary at random moments with some little insights, and occasionally has to do the last 5 laps if Martin Brundle's doing the interview there, and he can't say Mercedes, he says Mercedes. In the Mercedes.
Yeah, because I said Paul Di Resta. I was like, is he a Scottish rugby player? Or I just got this wrong. Anyway, yeah. So Paul Di Resta was saying that he was like, this is actually a really Mercedes heavy track. Red Bull should actually be pretty happy with what they've shown their performance can be. I mean, I think given that Spain and Portugal's tracks are very similar, probably should expect a bit like more of the same next week.
So moving down the grid, and I'd like to frame this in terms of drivers, looking at almost the rest of the grid in the whole, drivers who have most impressed, and I wanted to talk about Lando and his performance over the first 3 races, where I think if you were to describe them, he has maximised the package 3 weekends in a row, and maximised the circumstances, and has really, I think, taken a step up, and it's a step that I don't think a lot of people necessarily knew that he was going to be able to take.
Yeah, he's been really impressive, and he has this he has this really useful skill as an F1 driver being really good on lap 1. So he can get himself track position early on, and then obviously his race pace is good enough that he can just maintain that. So he starts races really, really well. And he did a really nice pass at on the really banked the really steep corner. I think it might be turn 11. Nice pass on the outside there, which got him ahead of. I think he got ahead of. No, he got ahead of. He got ahead of Ocon, and he also got ahead of Perez, but Perez thought he was over track limits there. But
yes, Perez may have complained about that move from Lando, but I think Perez was off track limits as well, and it was the first lap after a restart, so you tend to get a bit more latitude around that anyway. So I think it was a perfectly fair move, and yeah, it's Lando was building up a portfolio of strong performances, particularly at the start of races, and you wonder whose eye he is catching at this point, in terms of future opportunities. Probably not probably not for next season, and he might be very happy at McLaren, and McLaren certainly seem to be going in the right direction generally. But he is the point is he is making those performances where he is. I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't drawing attention from Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull. That he's a guy to keep an eye on. Because he is maximising the potential of the car, and if you're in a race-winning car and you've got a driver who maximises its potential, well, that's a very hefty combination. The other driver I wanted to discuss, because this is the first real kind of fair test I think we've had, is Mick Schumacher, who you mentioned Latifi finishing behind a Haas, and that Haas was Mick Schumacher, made a nice overtake and finished, I think, close to a minute ahead of his teammate. How is Mick getting on? He seems to have a lovely relationship with his engineer, who the messages they seem to be exchanging. He's quickly becoming known as the nicest man in Formula One, it seems, and I think this was definitely, if you know, the fact that he spun in the first race, spun into the wall in the second, to go to finishing a minute ahead of your teammate, albeit with questionable credentials to be in Formula One, and passing a car which is pound for pound quicker than you, that was a pretty good performance from Schumacher, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's always. I think if you look at all the timings of the race so far, he's been about a minute ahead of Nikita Mazepin. He's clearly.
But just to qualify that point, there were no extenuating circumstances this time. It was. I don't think did Mazepin spin. He just I don't think he did. Kudos to him.
That little error on Sergio Perez,
he just tried to take out
the lead
a lot of other drivers, but
yeah.
But he didn't spin. So there were no, it was just from whenever the restart happened to the end of the race, he was able to build up that advantage, which obviously reflects well on him.
Yeah, and I think he's clearly. I mean, he was a really strong performer in like Formula 2 and stuff. He's like won F2 championships. Like his like credentials of being here aren't really in question. And maybe the only reason you would question it is that because there are loads of other good drivers out there. Is it a bit too soon for him? But has had financial reasons why they had to get him involved. So
I think though that given how much, if a driver as good as Danny Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz are saying that going from one team to another is like driving a different formula, if you are literally driving a different formula, then to be able to perform at a high level after 3 races clearly reflects well on you as a driver. And I think it's very difficult when you're at the back of the grid. If you are a quick driver or you've got skills, the only real relevant comparison you can make is with your teammate. And Schumacher's almost at a disadvantage there just because of who his teammate is. Where it's kind of like when if you're Man City. Or if you're England at rugby and you're playing, or if you're any team in Six Nations playing Italy, if you beat them by 40 points, everyone says, well, yes, that's what was supposed to happen. And then if you only beat them by 10, everyone says, well, look how terrible you are. And Schumacher seems to kind of be in that position where he beats his teammate by a minute and everyone says, well, look at who your teammate is. But nevertheless, he's still doing that in a new car, in a new category that he hasn't driven in before. And I think he's done a pretty good job, albeit with some issues so far. And this race was his strongest one, and a big step up from the previous 2.
Yeah, I also think it also proves how ill-suited the Williams car was to this track. I mean, we're talking going back to the horses for courses point. Like there are a few cars that struggled much more on this track than others. It seemed like AlphaTauri didn't have the pace in this race. It looks like Williams had 1 lap pace good, but race pace not there at all. And also Aston Martin struggled. So I think while I know this is not to say that Schumacher isn't, not to knock Schumacher. Like he was still there to make the pass, and he was still keeping up with them in a really, really terrible car, to be frank. And then he kept the position for the rest of the race. So he still did the job, but also the Williams car just wasn't good this weekend.
Talking about other drivers that moved, this was the first race that Vettel outperformed Stroll, albeit in 13th and 14th. Just by that margin alone, you'd say it was his strongest weekend. And I suppose the concern for Aston Martin is obviously they've lost a lot of performance compared to last season. But if they've been affected by rules around, if they're one of these high rate cars that have been, or low rate, I forget which way around it is, low rate cars that have been impacted by the regulations like Mercedes, but this was a track that suited Mercedes, you would have maybe expected it to also suit Aston Martin as well. And judging by the results, 13th and 14th, that would suggest that it didn't.
Where did Stroll qualify, actually?
Stroll qualified in... Vettel was 10th.
Oh, Stroll qualified in 17th.
Stroll was 17th.
So, I mean, because Russell went down the grid, didn't he? So, yeah, I mean, Stroll made up some places. Vettel, I think, actually, to be fair, if you do look at the results, you can kind of see that, they talk about how some tracks are all about car performance, and if the what do they call it, the Noah's Ark tracks, Spain's like one of the most famous ones for a variety of reasons. And it looks like there was a bit of a Noah's Ark thing going on with this race as well. And Aston Martin seems to just find their point in the line of 13th and 14th.
They were elbowed out the queue, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, to go by qualifying position to race result, you have to tip your cap, of course, to Danny Rick going from 16th to 9th. But also Alonso going from 13th to where did he finish? He finished in 8th. So yes, Noah's Ark field, but also you look at the top, you look who the top 10 were: Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas, Perez, Norris, Leclerc, Ocon, Alonso, Ricciardo, and Gasly, and you can make an argument that they're the 10 best drivers on the grid as well. So just an argument. I'm not saying they are. So there's also an element of it, perhaps it also being a bit of a racer's circuit as well, and it favouring those people.
Yeah, well, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I didn't hear what. Ricciardo made a couple of errors on his Q1 lap, which meant he lost time and went out in Q1. But I think we all kind of knew that that wasn't where he was gonna finish, just because the McLaren car is fast and he's a good driver.
I mean, making errors, yes, but he was over a second slower than Norris in Q1. So there's making, he's still in this, learning, developing, learning the car, understanding how best to set it up for himself in a way that he's comfortable, as you said. And for now, really, the pressure, I think, is only on his shoulders because McLaren are third in the championship. That's probably realistically where they're the best that they can aim for. He's contributing with points. He scored points in every race so far as well. Not as many as Norris, obviously.
I think he's got the current record for most points
consecutive
in a row.
Points, or
14 races or something.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a global record or like a personal one, but either way, he's consistently scoring points, and you'd expect over time that performance is going to come. It's just it's you really want him to get there to kind of see pound for pound where he is against Norris. My perception before the season was that Ricciardo pound for pound would be stronger, but I'm not so sure now because Norris is performing so well. How close is it between McLaren and Ferrari? Because they seem to have put a bit of light between the rest of the midfield in terms of who are the next best cabs off the rank. And do you think it's likely that battle is going to continue for the whole season, or do you think one is perhaps slightly actually ultimately stronger than the other? Sorry.
So yeah, it's a tough one because you don't know how things are going to develop. But I think it's clear that McLaren have got the edge Like, I think just full race pace. They've got an edge on Ferrari, but not by too much. And like I think Leclerc has out qualified Lando 2 out of the 3 races. He out qualified him in Bahrain.
He is a Saturday specialist, isn't he, Leclerc, in terms of maximising performance over one lap.
Yeah.
I was actually surprised I thought Sainz had a really strong race. Sorry to change the driver yesterday, but ultimately it ended up not finishing in the points, which I was just sort of like drifted past with cars on who had pitted later coming through. He got passed quite late by Ricciardo and Alonso, I think, in the final stint of the race.
He got. I think it was like last couple of laps he got passed by Alonso, because Alonso just had serious pace on those hard tyres, didn't he?
Yeah, I wonder if the teams knew that there was going to be quite a, because it seemed even between taking Mercedes and Red Bull on the softs and the mediums. Or the mediums, because they started on the mediums, and then suddenly on the hards, Mercedes looked a lot stronger, and as you said, Alpine looked really strong on the hards as well. I wonder if the teams knew that there was going to be this performance delta between them, and if that is something that will play out consistently over the season and might favour teams to go to the hard tyre over the soft because they have a performance advantage there.
Yeah, I mean, it would be another like little interesting tactical thing to like look out for, wouldn't it? Because when like will Alpine will their strategy want to be different, and Mercedes' strategy want to be different, so they can make the most of the hard, whereas some teams might, as you say, want to make the most of the softer, quicker tyres.
You wanted to have a dig at DRS, I think.
No, I mentioned this to you in a text. I didn't get a response. But I have a theory. It was a text a while ago. I have a way.
How
of,
rude!
I have a way.
That was a very good reply.
I have a way of tweaking DRS that I think would make it better, but you still use it. Mm-hmm. So instead of DRS being how it is now, where if you're within a second, you can open DRS. The car in front, unless you're in a train, can't do DRS, so you overtake them. I was thinking that instead of doing it that way, actually drivers have a limit, like a DRS opening limit. So let's say they're allowed to open DRS 20 times a race, and they can open it whenever they want in DRS zones. But once they use up their 20, they don't get them back. That's kind of like that's all they're allowed to do. And because I was thinking, one of the annoying things about DRS is the driver in front just feels helpless. He can't really defend in a lot of these cases, and also you get these times where you just get these DRS trains where DRS isn't helping anyone, because all they're doing is everyone's just going quicker on the straights. If you change DRS from being a kind of reward to another tactic, almost like using ERS. So like ERS is a really good function because drivers have to like manage it cleverly in when they deploy it, when they save. It gives them a little bit of a boost to make overtakes. If you turn DRS into another tactical element to it, as opposed to being this kind of like slightly gimmicky reward, it might make overtaking and seem more genuine and more exciting, because everyone's kind of in the same boat. Everyone's got the same DRS. You can defend using DRS as well as attack with it. Some people might use their DRS too much. Some people might save it until they can like make a push at the end. So I just think it would be. I don't know. It just seems like it would be a more interesting way of using a function that I don't think necessarily you need to get rid of at this stage. I think we'll wait and see how the new regs play out. But I think it would be a good way of just giving them another. So
you still have to be within a second of the car in front to use it?
No, you can use it whenever you want.
Whenever you want, on certain areas of the track?
Yeah, so still have the DRS zones. But let's say you might have like 20, you've used 5 of your... Or
you're allowed it open for X number of seconds.
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, something like that. I mean, there's ways you have to like test to see which is the best way of doing it. like how many seconds or how many times you can open DRS. You'd need to work out what's the best way, so you're not doing it too much, but you're still giving enough opportunities for drivers to use this kind of like new tactic. But I think the key thing is that you can use it whenever you want. No, it doesn't matter where you are in the grid. Doesn't matter how close you are to cars in front or cars behind. It's just there for you to use as another way of giving you a bit more speed.
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth trying. And given it Formula One, and we can get on to something else that they're trying out this season, is willing to try things out to see if they work. Tweaking it to put the onus back on the driver in terms of when he uses it, rather than it just being available to him, feels a bit more authentic. I agree with you. I think it's something they should look at. I would have thought, because there's definitely enough data on it now with some of the tracks that they've been using DRS for 10 years now. It was 2011 it was brought in. Do they need it on every single race? Do they need a DRS zone on every single track? Are there some tracks where there is enough overtaking, opportunities to overtake, where it's not required? You have your Spains, and Portugal is probably another example where you need DRS to enable overtakes. But there are some tracks where you kind of think, well, maybe we can just leave them to it here. And again, that would feel more authentic. I don't know. I don't think they've decided if DRS is a part of the package next season.
So I think it's still going to be in next season, but they're kind of like going to be checking to see whether it's still needed because of the new regs making it a bit easier to pass.
It'll be a great, if it's not needed, then that is a big tick on the regulations, because that's that means that they're working, basically. And I think it's what you want, because there was something, old racing before DRS could be very boring, but there was a real excitement when it was quite a lively race and there was a lot of overtaking, because you knew it was genuine.
Like all the majority, if not all the overtakes, apart from maybe Lando Norris's one on the first lap, were very unsatisfying in Portugal, just because they just open it up and then it was inevitable.
Yeah, but unfortunately, and this is ultimately why it's stuck around for so many seasons now, is the alternative is even less satisfying, where you just have 20 cars following. You're just watching traffic for 66 laps.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I never say like get rid of it, because racing was really, really boring. And like, I think the reason why they brought in DRS is because I think in Abu Dhabi in 2010, I can't remember who the front two drivers were, but basically the guy in second had such a pace advantage over the first, but because of dirty air and stuff, he spent 10 laps just not being able to get past, and they were like, oh, we need to do something about this. So obviously it got to a desperate point that they needed to put in this slightly gimmicky solution of making it easier to pass. But you also do want to get to a stage where you want to either improve it so it seems more authentic, or you want to get rid of it altogether because it's just not necessary. And I just think giving it as a tactic would be another interesting way of doing it.
I'm inclined to agree. Something worth trying. Something else that Formula One is trying, and this was confirmed last week, is sprint qualifying. Now, I have one major issue, and it's not actually with the concept; it's with its name, because what is sprint qualifying to a layperson who doesn't know? Is it a really short qualifying session? Are they putting their trainers on and running to the end of to the first corner and back? Formula One, it needs to be sprint race qualifying, or else you don't know that it is a race that qualifies you for the main race. I suppose they've got a semantic issue around using race and not wanting to devalue the race, so they're not calling it a race even though it is a race. And if you didn't know it was a race and you just heard what it was called, you might not tune in because you don't think it's a race, you think it's qualifying. And the whole point of doing sprint race qualifying is to get more people to watch. So I think there's a problem with the name.
Yeah, get on to Ross Broughton, but so they use sprint. So they don't use sprint race qualifying in F2, but they do use sprint races in F2. They tend to function after the main race, and in F2 it's done so they reverse the grid from 1 to 8. So if you finished in first in the main race on Saturday, you then start in 8th on the Sunday. The rest of the grid don't change. It's just 1 to 8, 2 to 7, 3 to 6, and they wanted to bring it in to rebalance the amount of live kind of like live actual sport racing, taking some time away from practice, which so currently there are 3 hours of practice. There's about 45 minutes of qualifying, and then how long does the race last? Like an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. So now with the sprint race, which is 100 kilometers, how long is a normal race? How long do they try and make a normal race?
300 kilometers.
Yes, it's a third of it, isn't it? So sprint race is 100 kilometers. It's just another bit of action across the weekend. So now you have qualifying for the sprint race on Friday, sprint race on Saturday, and then the main feature race on Sunday. And I think I like the idea. I mean, it's not something that I think you'd want to do every single race, but I think taking it to certain places, and I like, even not on a trial, like if let's say the trial is successful, they like it, I still don't think you'd want it every single one. I think there's a novelty element to it that would be very useful in selling certain races. And you can imagine if it goes well, certain races might bid to have sprint races at their track, because it will prove to be more popular. And yeah, I think Formula One would do well to make sure they don't kind of give too much of a good thing with the sprint races as well. But
yeah,
let's see how
this is why I just think it's an intelligent move, is that they are trying it out, and anyone who's unsure can, be comfortable in the knowledge that this is just a trial, and if it doesn't work, and you'll have a pretty good idea after 3 races. It's being trialled in Silverstone, Monza, and another, but after Monza.
So yeah, it was going to be Brazil, but they're not sure the Brazil race is going to go ahead.
Yeah,
but they want to put it in one race outside of Europe, essentially.
Yeah, so it makes perfect sense to give it a go and see. And if it doesn't work, if it's sterile, if everyone's just happy with their position and no one really goes for anything because the risk reward ratio just isn't quite right, well then it doesn't work, and that's fine. I like that the weekend, for people who go to the races, the weekend is more balanced. There's something for you. There's something competitive for you on a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday.
Yeah, I really like that element of it.
Speaking as people who have gone to Grand Prix, and I think there's usually an F2 or an F3 race on a Friday, but it's just nice to know that there's always going to be some competitive Formula One action each day, in a way that it always was up until 96, when you had qualifying on a Friday and a Saturday. And I think, and for people who are tuning in, I think more people will watch a sprint race on a Saturday than they would another practice session.
Yeah.
That's not the be all and end all, but it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure if 3 races. I think 3 races is enough to definitively say it's a bad idea. I don't know if it's enough to definitively say it's a good idea. Obviously, depending on how it goes, because as we sort of touched on this in previous podcasts, when it's new and teams are unsure how it plays, there are lots of variables at play which can make for interesting races. But if they're doing this week in, week out, which again maybe speaks to the point that you don't do it week in, week out, teams adjust, adapt, understand better how it all works, and a lot of those variable pieces are extracted therefore. So it might be, they trial it for 3 races and then need to extend that for the following season before they make a definitive answer around it.
Yeah,
But I'm pleased. I'm pleased that it's been given the green light.
yeah. So I think so. Just another element to it. So if you in the sprint race, if you finish in first, you get 3 championship points. Second, you get 2 championship points, and third, you get 1. No one else gets any points. I think there might be where they might have to think about. That's where this is one of the ways in which the trial has to like fine tune certain parts of it, and I think maybe in the points it might be one of the areas, just because the like F1's been worrying about how competitive the sport is since the turbo hybrid era started, and it's been really, really struggling to make it interesting to people because it's been so uncompetitive. There's been one team at the top, now there's 2. The thing is, it could still be more interesting, because you could actually you could get like 5 teams or 4 teams vying, as opposed to just the top 2, and then that'd be much more interesting than just 2 teams. With these kind of like championship points being involved, only being given to 1, 2, and 3, and no one else involved getting anything, just might swing the balance back into the top teams, because realistically, unless something goes seriously wrong, you can't imagine anyone else picking up the top 3 spots than 4 out of the fastest cars on the grid.
I suppose conceptually, you've got to think. So what are drivers racing for over 100 kilometers? If you're in second and you've got 2 points, how hard are you racing for an additional point? If you're Mercedes and you're first and second, do you just tell your drivers, right, don't race, just defend from behind? Who is going to be racing for what? If you're basically, I think where this would work as a concept is if the guy who qualifies on pole gets punted off on the first corner and has to battle his way through to as high as he can to have a decent race. But how often is that going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. It's interesting because obviously the final, the result of the sprint race is what's going to start, how the grid's going to start in the main race. So you then will start to realise how much people value their grid position in the main race, because in obviously with normal qualifying, it's there's not very high risk part of the sport. You're just out there on fastest laps. People get out of the way for you when you're going around, and you've just got to go as fast as you can. You set all your engine modes as high as you can, fuel flow as much as you can, or whatever, and you just go, and you just really want to get as high up the grid as possible. If now, instead of just to drive 1 lap really fast, you've got to drive 20 laps against people who are trying to do that as well, how much do you then value passing someone on a certain corner when you realise it could put you out of the race? Let's say damage the car badly and mechanics are up all night fixing it for the main race next. I think that's going to be an interesting one to see how teams, how it changes what they value, and is it still all just going to be about your qualifying on the Friday? I think where it might become interesting is so when people like Danny Ricciardo had a bad Q1 in Portugal, let's say he has a bad Q1 on a Friday and into the sprint race, he is now going to be one person who is actually going to be gunning to get up the grid. Yeah,
but this is like a hypothetical conversation, because again, they're trying it out.
Yeah.
That just means that's less action in the race, therefore.
Yeah, so that was where eventually I was going to go with it, because it now means that
to talk across you then.
No, because I just thought of it as I was speaking. So, you're right. It means that then we have like a load of action happening in the sprint race, and then the actual pace of the cars are settled the actual race pace of the cars are like now sort of settled into their
Yeah,
more
so-
natural position.
So
as
your
opposed to
Leclercs and your
Yeah.
Russells, who are always out of position because they qualify so well, are in
Yeah.
position,
yeah,
and then no, everyone's in their order, so no one
Yeah.
passes anyone.
everyone's in pace order. So when it comes to the Sunday,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why this is why we're trying.
Yeah.
This is why they're trying out. We're sort of trying to imagine different scenarios.
yeah,
I think it's an interesting concept, and it's unfortunately I think it could both succeed and fail. It could succeed in that more people tune in on a Saturday to watch those races than they do the qualifying session, so the Saturday experience is better, but the Sunday experience is potentially worse
yeah.
for some of those reasons. But fortunately, we're just we can wait and see and know that it's nothing is set in stone. The other piece of news that landed over the last week was that we're not going to Canada this year, which is a shame.
Yeah.
COVID rearing its head, and this is in all likelihood probably not the last time this is going to happen. You mentioned Brazil already, a country struggling with COVID and therefore bringing its Grand Prix into question.
Yeah, I think Mexico are another one that are a bit iffy about it. So
Yeah, so Canada's gone, though it has secured a long-term deal. So hopefully in the more normal times we will be going back there consistently. And Turkey, which everyone really enjoyed last year for obvious reasons, is the replacement. So we're going to Turkey, which obviously weather plays its part. I just always found it very odd that Canada was in that you'd be racing around Europe and then just pop to Canada for a week. But obviously you can't. It's too cold there to do it when they're in Brazil and at the start of the end of the year. So that was obviously the reason why. But so from a logistics point of view, the travelling around is going to make a lot more sense.
All right. So only a week between races now. We've briefly touched on Spain.
Yeah, no one can't wait for Spain. Hopefully it's a vaguely interesting race.
So it is helped this year by the fact that they're not doing pre-season testing in Spain.
Yeah, that's true.
So they don't have all the data that they normally do collect to refine the cars.
That's true.
So,
they just have past knowledge.
Yeah.
So possibly an even harder race for your new drivers and your new teams because they have even less experience on the track.
Yeah, but I think Spain's in one of these categories where I think drivers love driving it, but current makeup of the cars means that it's not necessarily the most exciting race to watch. But so it just means that the Saturday qualifying is...
Yep, Saturday qualifying will be well worth tuning into because that's potentially where the race could be won. When it's particularly at the front where it's so close, and it'll be... There's no outright pace advantage. So if you have track position going into turn one on the first lap, that really sets you up well for the rest of the race.
Yeah, yes, and I think this again will be a big test for Red Bull to see how they can match up against Mercedes power on a track that's all fast or medium corners, apart from that slightly annoying chicane at the end before we get onto the last fast corner. And I think this will again probably be a race where if Red Bull are like competing but maybe don't win, they'll probably take that just because they realise that Mercedes do still have the power advantage over them.
We shall wait and see, and we don't have to wait long.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So I guess wait for Spain. Catch us after that.
Thanks for tuning in to Very
much mistaken.